Yo, welcome to the Matchcraft YouTube. Today, we are going to go over the Day 2 conversion rates from Peoria Regionals. I'm not listening to anything. I don't know why I got those on. If you've never been here before, we tend to either look at a lot of data before, after tournaments. I like to make predictions, meta predictions, things like that. So this is going to be something that I think should inform your decisions, but this is not the end-all be-all. This is not the order of the best decks, but I've ordered them in the most successful converting from day 1 to day 2. Now, there are a few reasons why some did better than others, even though some of the best decks are actually the lowest on the list. But before we get into that, shout out to the sponsor, Tabletop Village, located in Seattle, Washington. If you're ever in Seattle, be sure to check them out. They are the best store in the world, and I love them so much. So be sure to check that out. But anyway, let's go ahead and get into some of the data. Here's what we used. This is on RK9's Twitter. So RK9 Labs took all the data. They gave us the whole meta analysis, and then I used Limitless and the results from Peoria to just do some very simple division. Nothing we can't all do, but I've compiled the information for you so you don't have to. You know, you can't read that most likely unless you're on like a big screen watching on, 1080p or whatever. But we have Palkia Inteleon as the most popular deck, Arceus Giratina as second, Mew as third, Origin Form Palkia Inteleon as fourth, and towards deck, the Comfy Sableye Radiant Zard as fifth, and then it goes on from there. So the meta ended up being about what I predicted in my video before the tournament. With that said, I will admit I underestimated Kyurem being played that much more than everything else. I figured it was going to be about tied with Mew and Palkia, but I didn't expect it to be pretty statistically ahead of them. So that was super interesting and something to keep in mind going into Salt Lake City or Lille regionals as well. But let's look at the conversion rates. So the most successful deck, and if you follow my Twitter, you should. I tweeted this out when I found out the data. Arceus Goodra, 10 of the 31 converted to day 2. None of them converted to top 8, but there were a couple in the top 16, and there were a couple spattered around as well. And the thing about that, the most popular deck was Kyurem. The second most popular was Giratina V-Star, and the third most popular was Mew. These are decks you would assume, say the word assume are bad matchups, and yet it was ridiculously successful. Lost Zone version, 0 out of 21, very bad. But that's important to note. Any of the Goodra believers out there, I'm becoming a Goodra believer. Now, if you are going to bring Goodra, there is a tech you should, I don't know about a tech. There's something you should tech for. I'm going to get to that in 1 second. I'm a Goodra believer now. I think the Goo with Arceus is a good deck for sure. Tier 1? No, I'd call it a tier 2 deck. I think it's pretty good. Reggie ended up being the second. No one saw that coming. If you saw that coming and you can honestly say that with your whole heart, please let me know in the comments so I can know those of you out there who made a ridiculous prediction that was correct, because I didn't see this coming. A quarter of the Reggie, so about a third of the Art Goodra and about a quarter of the Reggies made day 2. Those are really high conversion rates. I think Reggie is still a good play as well. I think Goodra is a good play in Salt Lake City and probably Lille. I think Reggie is also a good play, but I think Reggie is a slightly worse play. And one of the reasons why Reggie is going to get hurt is some people will tech for Reggie. Again, none made top 8, but there were a lot in top 16 and top 32. I think Reggie is actually kind of a force to be reckoned with right now, which seems like the stupidest thing to say. And the other reason why I think Reggie is a good play, currently on PTCGO, Gift Energy is banned. Because of that, all the online tournaments are Reggie-less metas, where Reggie's not doing well. There's a world where we look at those results and people kind of forget how good Reggie is. So I think Reggie's good. The downside is because of how good it was, I think people are going to test against it more than they would have. And some decks have close matchups, but if you know how to play against it with that deck, it can swing slightly into someone's favor. So Reggie's good. High conversion rate. I think I'd play Reggie. Sure, go for it. The third deck, the surprise, if you've been watching the online tournaments, less of a surprise because they've been doing really well. Bliss Tank, and this is when I mentioned Art Goodra. I would try to find a Miltank counter. What is it? I don't know. I'm sorry, I can't help you there. If I could, I would, because beating Miltank is fun. I like beating Miltank. I know we had the Morpeko Miltank deck profile with Alex, and then we had Jack Moore on the podcast where we talked about Morpeko Miltank. I don't like losing to Miltank. It doesn't feel good. Normally, I don't want to tech for it this tournament. I would tech for it in a way that isn't necessarily Empoleon. Empoleon was a good counter, except Bliss Tank plays for Path to the Peak. Very high conversion rate. I would expect people to gravitate more towards Bliss Tank. Not super popular, but high conversion rate. If you're considering Bliss Tank, this should be incredibly encouraging. A quarter of them made it into day 2. They had a rough day 2, but I think that can be fixed with, some slightly more optimized lists for the predicted meta. So as you're seeing, I said, don't take this as gospel, but it's important to note some of the most successful decks were not what we expected. And into a wide open meta, I think there's a lot to be said about that. Then we get into the stuff you expect. Palkia Inteleon, 15%, really high percentage for something that had such a high meta share. 13, 59, 31. Reggie kind of big, but there were a lot more Palkia Inteleon than all those other decks, and it was still a 15%. I still think it's the best deck. If you were sitting there saying, I think I'm playing Palkia, these should give you a lot of confidence. 15% is a really high conversion rate. I think this deck is incredibly good. I would not be the least bit shocked to see them in top 8. We had 3 of them in top 8, if I remember correctly. Yeah, 3 in top 8 as well. 3 out of 100. A 3% conversion rate in a top 8 is also really high when you consider how heavily it was played and won in the finals. Palkia Inteleon, incredibly good. Please don't sleep on it. People keep sleeping on this deck. Mew VMAX, next one in, 11.5, still pretty high, 13 out of 113. It was brought by one of the best testing groups, which is that Ohio group of Mahone and Riley and etc. Right? So that is important to take note of. It's also important to take note of the Reggie. I completely missed that. One of the best testing groups in the game, which is the Azul and Caleb Gedimer and all of them, they brought Reggie as well. So Reggie was played by some of the best players in the world. So maybe that inflated its meta share in day 2 a little bit as well. Mew, same thing. Mew's incredibly good though. It's just, here's the number. Pretty high. About 1 out of every 10 Mews made it to day 2, and it was the second most played deck. Arceus Giratina. This one surprised me. So I wasn't surprised. I was really surprised by the Goodra, but that was the first one I saw. I was kind of surprised by the Bliss Tank, but not because I'm recording this after we've seen it kind of dominating online. And it's that makes sense. Palkia doesn't surprise me. Deck's nuts. Arceus Giratina. Are we sleeping on this deck? There's a real world we are. And you know why? It plays 4 Marnie and 4 Path. 4 Marnie, 4 Path, something like an Oko. I'm actually unsure what else you really need from a deck outside of hand disruption, sometimes just winning because of that. Path, sometimes just winning because of that. The combination of hand disruption and Path, winning because of that, and KOing whatever you want. That's pretty darn good. So Arceus Giratina at 11.5 due to rounding. It is below Mew VMAX, but that doesn't matter. 0.002 or whatever it was. Who freaking cares? Very good deck. Another one that I think, you want something off meta, quote unquote, that is still very good. I think Arceus Giratina showed at Peoria that it is a little better than we expected. Tough day 2s. And that's another thing you have to consider of okay, well, what were the best decks in day 2? Why did they do better in day 2 than others? But I think Arceus Giratina, pretty darn good. Hisuian Zoroark was right behind it, 10.7. I'm 100% admit. I put this in my tier 2 at the start of the format. I still think it's tier 2, but I think it's high tier 2. I think this deck is actually incredibly nuts. I think it is the best aggro deck in the format. Mew. Why isn't Mew the best aggro deck in the format? Mew's become less aggro and more like Palkia, where if it goes first, it can out aggro anything, but if it goes second, it plays a different game. Hisuian Zoroark, first, second, doesn't matter. You draw past turn 1, you go third essentially, doesn't matter. It wants to go boom every single turn. I think this deck is actually really, really, really powerful, and also at a pretty high conversion rate in a day 2 with a lot of different lists. We saw the top 8 list play nothing except Crobats. We saw a list in top 16 that played 4 Celebrations Mews, and we saw some down lower in day 2 playing the B-Barrel engine. We still don't know how to play this deck and this card. And I think that says a lot. I think it's very good, high conversion rate. Keep the Zoroark in the back of your mind too. Lost Zone Tina. This is the deck I would have played. I still stand by it. Why was its conversion rate so low? 7 point is not great. It's really hard to play. I think a lot of people likely brought Giratina and just didn't fully get how much goes into this deck. If you played Giratina, I wouldn't say you have to put it down if you didn't do how you want to. And be like, oh, I played in Peoria and I went, maybe you went like 4-3-2. Is that how math works? 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. Yeah, maybe you went 4-3-2 in Peoria and you feel a little down about that, right? A deck like this, the more you play it, the better it's going to be. Make a few changes, keep practicing, it'll be fine. So that's one reason I would make an excuse for Giratina is I think it is a very high skill expressive deck. And because of that, the conversion rate is pretty darn low. Kyurem Palkia, incredibly low conversion rate, 7.5, partially because it's the most popular deck in the tournament. It was, oh gosh, I should have done the math. Let's say 17% of the meta. They cannibalize each other at that high, almost 1 out of every 5 decks is a Kyurem Palkia. It's freaking ridiculous, right? So they, like I said, they cannibalize themselves. The deck also has some glaring weaknesses in it. I'm not sure if people were able to exploit them properly or not, but they exist. So if you're going to play Kyurem, that's fine. Just like Zoroark, it goes boom. I personally kind of like Zoroark more as a go boom deck, but there's a very good chance I would consider Kyurem if I were going to Salt Lake City. When something is played this high, it makes sense to have a low conversion rate, but like I said, just take a look at that. Yes, there were 2 in top 4, but it's struggled quite a bit, and it's no deck in this current format is easy to play, but it's not as high of a skill cap as the Lost Zone engine or anything like that. And so it's just something to keep in the back of your mind moving forward for Kyurem is, okay, do you feel like you have the matchup shored up that you need to? Because Kyurem struggled. The lowest conversion rate was, of the ones we're going to look at, was conveniently the deck that won the tournament. Why? Just like Giratina, I think the learning curve is really high for Lost Zone engine decks. In fact, if you go back and watch my video where I played Tord's deck, there's a handful of little misplays in there, and I've played a lot of Comfey. I think when we listen to our interview with Tord, he will point out that there were plays that he made where, oh, this turned out to be incorrect. You learn a lot with this deck. You see matchups you weren't expecting. You see a flower selecting you weren't expecting, and suddenly things get weird. Very hard deck to play, but I think it's also important to just take note of with the baby version. Got a target on its back after winning, and it struggled in the tournament. That is a weird combination that makes me really not like it for Salt Lake City personally, because I don't know what to do with this number. Like I said, this one, I can kind of blame it on they beat each other a lot. It was played by just like everyone. So, people at their first regional, there's the nerves and misplays happen because of nerves, so that number being a little lower, sure, still a little weary of Kyurem. This one, that one's a little more the fact that it struggled and has a massive target on its back is terrifying to me. Gonna throw that one out there because I'm not going to Salt Lake City, so I'm full leaks on everything. Currently, what would I be considering? Honestly, got a spicy little Kyurem list that I can't share with y'all because it's not mine, that I think is pretty cool. And Zoroark is definitely on my list too. I think the deck is very fun, and of course, you gotta think about Bliss Tank. Would I pull the trigger on Bliss Tank? Probably not. The deck's kind of stupid, but deck's very good. Hopefully, these numbers give you a little bit more to think about as you prepare for Salt Lake City and Lille about the decks that might be better than we expected. Arceus Goodra, Reggie's, Bliss Tank, Palkia is as good as we expected. Those decks, maybe they're better than we expected. Decks that might actually be a little worse than we expected. The Kyurems, the Lost Zone engines, maybe there's something there we don't know beyond just the skill. I don't know. Like I said, it's just giving us the data. I'm giving you my best interpretation, but I don't know everything, unfortunately. Remember to like, comment, subscribe, all that other YouTube stuff, and I will catch you all in the next video. Peace out.